It's 11 o'clock in Pasadena and 2 o'clock in Paramus, New Jersey. Good morning and welcome to Vintage Motocross Radio. I'm your host, Joe Abadi. Whether you're listening from your phone or computer, please take a moment to share the show with your friends on Facebook or on YouTube. Today's program is made possible with the help of our sponsors, Northwest Mako CZ. For all your Mako and CZ parts, please contact Alan Brown. Preston Petty Products, the legend continues. AMSOIL, the first in synthetic oil since 1973. Full Circle Racing for your rims, spokes, lacing, and truing. For all your vintage and modern bikes, please see Full Circle Racing. Vinco, keep the ride going with over 650 products in their catalog. Motion Pro for all your specialized tools, cables, and controls. My guest this morning has accomplished things no other racer in history has. He's the only AMA professional motorcycle racer to win an AMA 125 National, AMA 250 National, AMA 250 Supercross, and AMA Superbike race. He is considered to be the most versatile racer of all time. He also won a 125 National in Maryland on a production bike against some of the most legendary racers in motocross who were aboard Factory Works bikes at the time. He was named the AMA Athlete of the Year in 1982 and also stood on the podium of an AMA Grand National dirt track race. We're going to be talking about his 10-year career aboard Kawasaki, Honda, as well as a specially prepared bike he campaigned for Fox Racing. We'll be talking about that and, of course, his unforgettable performance during the very unique event known as the Superbikers. It's my pleasure to have as my guest this morning 2001 AMA Hall of Fame inductee, Mr. Steve Wise. Steve Wise, are you with me?
I'm with you, Joe. How you doing there, partner?
I'm doing pretty well this morning, Steve. Thank you for joining me. And you know, Steve, with the research I do for these interviews, I ran across something that said that your first name isn't really Steve.
No, actually, my name is Gary, and the first year of my Kawasaki career, when I would go to the stadium races, that had Gary Wise up on the board there, and I called the AMA. I said, "No, I'm going to go by Steve. My name's Gary Stephen Wise."
Right, and that was it. So you changed it pretty much right then and there in your professional career. Everyone knew you as Steve Wise.
That's it. Everybody knows me as Steve. I'm pretty much, my dad's name's Gary, so my dad would always call me Steve, and just to kind of delineate between us. And yeah,
sure.
So that's it.
Yeah, you know, like in my house, when somebody said Joe, like 4 guys answered at the same time, between fathers, grandfathers, and everybody else. So, Steve, tell me this: your journey in motorcycling. Where did that first begin? What's your first recollection of swinging a lug over something with 2 wheels?
Well, my dad always loved motorcycles. Since I was a little kid, I remember my dad, and my dad was very smart. Of course, my dad was a very successful businessman and so forth. But my dad would ride with these guys that always had Harleys and Triumphs and Honda 350s, and they'd go trail riding. My dad would buy Bultacos and Montesas and Kawasaki 238 Green Streaks and just kind of blow them away. And my dad was not, an excellent rider, so to speak, at that time, but he always could keep up with the guys because he had better machinery. And so my dad introduced me to racing, and I remember driving down the road here in McAllen, Texas, and at like 8 years old, and my dad lets me drive his Kawasaki Green Streak, and of course he's in the back of me, and that was really before children started riding bikes. But that's my father started me, Joe, into everything.
I see. So he was really the big influence in your life in motorcycling.
Absolutely. We had a good friend named Sonny Hadley who had an airplane, and we would, every weekend it seemed like we'd fly somewhere to watch a race around Texas. And there'd be 3 grown men and me, a little boy, and I'd always go along with my dad. And so I fell in love with motorcycles in the very beginning. And then, of course, when I turned 12, when I was around 12, my father bought me a CT90 Honda. Mm-hmm. And that's when everything began for me. My father was a real estate broker, had the largest real estate company in McAllen at the time, and then of course he loved motorcycles. And then my father became the Honda dealer in McAllen. He owned the Honda shop in McAllen, so I kind of had a head start as far as motorcycles.
Okay, so when did your racing career begin, Steve? When did you hit the track?
Well, when I was about 13 years old, there was a little local track down in the Rio Grande Valley where I live in McAllen, in Harlingen. And I went out there with my Honda. I had an SO100, and I was racing against Pentons and DKWs and other two-strokes. And I got third place on my very first race. And then we were hooked by then. And then my dad being a Honda dealer, I had a souped-up SL125 and so forth. But then my father, my dad's a brilliant man, being the smart man he was, because Honda didn't have the CRs at that time.
Mm-hmm.
So my dad was looking around, and we got the Penton dealership. And so I could have a race bike. He got the Penton dealership. And so I had a 6 days Penton 125 back in 73, 74, before the CRs hit the market. And really after I got the Pentons, I really started, thankfully I was able to pretty much dominate Texas motocross in the 125 class. Back in that time, especially the southern part of Texas anyway.
Right. Now, it makes me, although I don't have it in my questions here, it does prompt me to ask you the question about the Elsinores, the 74 or 73, 250 and 125s. How many bikes did you guys get, and were they going out the door as fast as everybody thought they did?
Well, my dad had a great Honda dealership. Of course, he was in his real estate company, but my uncle ran the Honda dealership at the time. Yes, the CRs were just incredible motorcycles. In fact, a really good story is when this 125 CR came in.
Mm-hmm.
I told my dad, "There's no way that bike will be as good as the Penton. There's no way." And my dad said, "Well, we were going to this big race in Austin called the Aquafest in '74, and we were driving there. And my dad said, we're going to take both bikes, the Honda and the Penton." So we loaded both bikes up and went to the race. And that morning at the Aquafest in Austin was probably one of the biggest races in Texas at the time. In the first practice, I went on the Penton, and then I rode the Penton. I came back in, and I changed bikes, went out on the CR, and I came back in, and I said, "Load that Penton on the trailer. I'll never ride it again." And the beautiful thing is, when I was in the film, John Penton story. I was in that film.
Yes,
I had a small part within there, and I talked a little bit about that happening. But what I have to say really blessed me is when I was inducted into the Hall of Fame, the AMA Hall of Fame, John Penton was in the audience, and I told the story about my father getting the Penton dealership. I didn't say Penton in the beginning. I said my father got a European bike dealership so I could compete with the YZs and the RMs and the other Japanese two-strokes that were the Kawasaki, the KX, because I couldn't compete with those guys on the XL 125 four-stroke. It just wasn't possible. So I was able to tell that story, and John Penton and I laughed and talked after that ceremony. It was really a lot of fun.
Yeah. Now, Steve, your professional career, it began pretty early with the help of another Texas MX star, Steve Stackable. Tell us about that chain of events and how Short Stack helped you get along.
Well, that's a funny story. And, of course, Texas, we were full of motocross talent back in the 70s. I mean, you had the Dawsons and the Pickards up in Dallas. And you had the Holberts and the Hackneys in Houston. And Keith Duffy was a very good rider from Houston. But mostly was Steve Stackable and Ken Howerton.
Mm-hmm.
And, I mean, whenever I showed up in a local race in the Austin area, for example, I could pretty much win it fairly easy unless Howerton or Stackable was there. And Stackable and I became pretty good friends. And through the years, and we talked periodically. We were friendly. Some of the riders you weren't really friends with are really friendly, but Stackable and I were, and I was pretty much dominating the 125 class in Texas. And Kawasaki was trying to hire Steve Stackable. Excuse me. And he had already signed with Mako, and Tim Smith, who was the Kawasaki team manager at that time. This is 1975. Well, it's a long time ago, Joe.
Yeah, well,
But Tim Smith asked Steve Stackable, he said, Steve, we are looking for a 125 rider, too. We're going to really try to make a run in the 125 class. Do you know anybody that I might look at? And Steve Stackable's words were, there's a porky little Texan down here that smokes everybody. I was kind of maybe a little porky at that time. And I got a phone call. It was like November of 74. I remember I was sitting in my living room. I think, I don't know what we were doing. It might have been on a Saturday evening. I think I was watching some college football. And the phone rang, and I answered the phone, and the guy said, Steve Wise there? I said, this is he. And he So this is Tim Smith from Kawasaki, California. We'd like to fly you out here and watch you ride. And I was, okay, you know. I think the next week or the week after that, my dad and I flew out to California, and I rode Torleif Hansen's Work 74 works bike at a local race at Carlsbad.
That was a 250 though, Steve?
250 works bike, SR 250.
Right.
And I'm telling you, a local race at Carlsbad is like a national.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So you had Tommy Croft and Marty Smith and all those guys. And there was a guy, of course, Galen Mosier. But there was a guy named Jeff Vidic, I believe his name was. And that he could fly. And I got sixth place in that local race at Carlsbad on that unfamiliar bike. And the next day, after the race, Tim Smith said, "Can you and your dad come to the Kawasaki offices on Monday morning?" We said, "We'll be there." And they signed me to ride for the 75 season. And they sent over the bike. It was a rotary valve, SR 125. But oh my gosh, it was so slow. And I couldn't break the top 5 on that bike in the first year of my national riding there.
So when you got that, Steve, when you got that bike, did you ride that? Did you stay in California and race that 125 the next week, or did it go to Texas with you?
Oh, the works bike?
Yeah, the 125.
Well, no, we had a mechanic, and in fact, my mechanic was Jim Felt. Jim Felt was my mechanic, and we had a truck, you know, and I flew to the races, and I lived in McAllen. I lived in McAllen, Texas, but Jim Phelps was my mechanic, 75, and I would fly, you know, like I did, and but I couldn't get in the top 5, and with 2 races to go. Of course, that's the year that Marty Smith, and we'll talk about Marty later.
Yeah.
But that's the year that Marty Smith dominated, won every moto except I think 1 or 2 motos the whole year.
Yeah.
And I mean, he was just dominating everybody. And so there was 2 nationals left when Kawasaki said, "Well, you can't even get in the top 5. We're gonna pull the program." And I kept telling them that the bike is so slow. And they, of course, you know, we can say that a lot of times, and a lot of times that's true. A lot of times it's not. But anyway, so the next national was Texas, San Antonio. Well, I took a 75 CR 125 from my dad's shop, and my best friend at the time, and still we're very good friends, Jimmy Strait. He was as good or better than any factory mechanic on the whole circuit. He ported my 125. We put a 36 or 34 McCooney carburetor on there, an FMF pipe, and Girling gas shocks. That's the only modifications we had in 1975 on that CR 125. And so we went to San Antonio, and I led Marty Smith for 35 minutes in the first moto. And he barely got by me toward the end, and I just kind of pooped out. And I gave it all the first moto, and I got second the first moto, and I think I got third or fourth the second moto, but I got second overall. I got second overall that day and almost beat Marty Smith the first moto. And Monday morning, Tim Smith called me up and he goes, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe it." And he said, "Okay, Steve, will you ride for us in 1976? Will you come back and ride the 125 in 76?" He said, I believe now what you were saying, that bike was slow. Mm-hmm. And we're going to have you a good bike in 76 if you'll come back. I said, "Okay, I'll come back, but if the bike's slow, I'm quitting."
Yeah.
That's what I told him. So, and then 76 came along, and of course, we know 1976 is the year of the hurricane. And we go to Hangtown in 76, and the bike was beautiful. I mean, you can see that bike everywhere. It's in the AMA Hall of Fame. It's a beautiful bike. And Mark Hildebrand, I believe, owns that SR 125.
Yes.
But Joe, it had no horsepower. Handled wonderful, but it was so slow.
Yeah.
It was a rotary valve bike, but it was a different motor than the 75 motor. And I got sixth place in Hangtown. Of course, Hannah, and then you had Grossi, Laporte, and Glover. You had a lot of competition in the 25 class. And Monday morning, I called Tim Smith up. I said, I quit. So I quit Monday morning and went back to my dad's shop, pulled a CR 125, a 76 CR 125 off the floor, and Jimmy Strait modified it. And the next weekend after Hangtown, actually, let me go back a little bit, was Michigan, the second race, and Terry Mulligan, the Honda team manager, called me up. And we weren't even really going to go to Michigan because I wasn't ready. We didn't have anything ready, and it was going to be a long drive. I was going to skip the Michigan National and get ready for the Maryland National in Maryland, which was a month later. And but Terry called me up. He said, "Are you going to be in Michigan?" I said, "No, I'm not." He goes, "Well, we'll fly you up there. You can ride one of our support bikes, and we need you to help Marty Smith beat Bob Hanna." I said, "Well, okay." So they flew me to Michigan. And I got there, the bike wasn't even ready. It was just a practice bike, and I had to work on it all day. And I'm no mechanic. I'm not a mechanic at all. I had to work on it all day Saturday, and I ended up third on Sunday. The next day, I think Hannah won, and Billy Grossi got second. I got third. I think Marty Smith broke down one motor again, and he had a lot of trouble that 76 with his bikes. Mm-hmm. But then we had a month off, and then, of course, on my Jimmy Strait tuned 125, we went to Maryland, the Kaiser's Ridge National in Maryland.
That was on July 4th, 76, I think.
The 200th year anniversary of the United States of America.
Yes, sir.
What a wonderful time it was. And that day was, I wrote an article for Terry Good's Motocross Works Bikes somewhere on his webpage. It's an article I wrote about that called The Perfect Storm of the Day, because there was no way that any privateer could have really won unless everything went perfect. And that day was absolutely perfect for me. And the way it worked out, you had Bob Hanna, you had Marty Smith, Billy Grossi, Daniel Laporte on the factory bikes. I think, I forgot who was riding my 125 at that time.
Oh, yeah.
Mickey Kessler was on the 125, was on the Kawasaki.
Warren Reed.
Warren Reed, yeah, Warren was a great rider.
You had some fast DG guys, too, on some private bikes, some DG bikes.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Ron
Turner.
Danny Turner. Mm-hmm. Brock Glover. Yeah, there was a lot of riders that could be Arlo England. There was 15 riders who could go really fast.
Yes.
And that day was July 4th, 1976 in Maryland. The temperature was about 75 degrees, which is very rare for July. Mm-hmm. Of course, there were 45-minute motos back then, Joe. Now, we had to be men back then.
Oh, yeah.
just kidding.
Oh, yeah.
But, it was 40 minutes, actually 40 minutes plus 2 laps. And the first moto of that bicentennial race, I got the whole shot. And Marty Smith got off the line about 10th or 15th, somewhere in there from what I remember. And he caught me with about 5 minutes to go, Marty did. And I let him go. I just had energy, and I had a huge lead. We were way ahead. Bob Hanna was in third or something like that, somewhere. I never saw anybody. And Marty won. I got second. The second moto was a carbon copy, except Marty Smith got off the line about 20th. I got the whole shot, and I was gone. I had a 25-second lead, and I have a beautiful picture here at my house, and it shows Dave Arnold standing out in the middle of the track, giving Smith the pit board that says "Wise plus 18." But the only problem was I'm on a pretty much stock. Well, my bike was just as fast. I mean, in Marty's defense, my bike was just as fast as Marty. Jimmy Strait had my bike singing. That thing was singing, and it was just as fast as any works bike. Now, but we only had 6 inches of suspension. Marty had 12. Yeah. And Bob and I only had, but with the lower suspension, the bike probably turned a little bit better too. So, and the track wasn't that rough. I said perfect storm of the day. It was the Davy Coombs' track there in Kaiser's Ridge, Maryland at the time. And the second moto, I got the whole shot. I was gone. And Marty Smith was catching me about 1 to 2 seconds a lap. And I would come by, and my mechanic, Jimmy Strait, would go, minus 18, minus 16, minus 14. And I'm like huffing and puffing. And I know he's catching me, and I'm trying to go as fast as I can. And with about a lap and a half to go, he caught me. He got right to my rear fender. Right. but this time, in my mind, I'm thinking to myself, he's not coming by. And if he tries to come by, either we're both going to go down or I'm going to win. That was my mindset at the time. And he never really got beside me except the last lap. There was about 4 corners left. We went down this downhill, made a right-hand turn. and we're coming up the uphill. And thankfully, the track wasn't really very rough that day. It was kind of hard packed. And I went to the middle of the track because I'm thinking, you know, he's going to try to come by me up this uphill. I mean, he wasn't a works bike. My bike was just as powerful, though, but anyway. And I remember to this day, however long ago that was, 1976, was a long time ago, I could feel him coming up to the left side of me. I could feel the vibration. I went straight to the fence. I mean, and I heard his bike. I could hear him go, you know, and I heard him shut off. And I went, I got it. I knew I had it because the top of the hill, you made a left turn, there was a checker flag. And the minute he shut off, because I basically put him in the fence, and that's what you do when you win the race. And kind of like what Cooper Webb did last night. That was an incredible pass.
It was
very incredible. We'll talk about that a little later too. But anyway, so I ended up winning the race. And I was hoping that Honda would come around and hire me for 77, but they didn't. And then I went on to Motocross Fox.
I want to know about that Motocross Fox bike, Steve. How did that deal come about? How was the bike set up? Did it have a Mugen cylinder? What were the arrangements there?
Well, when I was a Kawasaki factory rider, and Jim Felt was very, very good friends with a guy named Cliff White.
Mm-hmm.
Cliff White was the mechanic for the Canadian champion on Kawasaki, Jan-Erik Sahlqvist. And so I met Cliff, and I spent some time with him because we had traveled together with Jan-Erik and Cliff and me and Jim Felt from time to time whenever I'd stay on the road in 75 when I was at Kawasaki. And so I met Cliff, but I never really talked to him too much. And at the end of 76, I was shocked. No factory called me as well. I really, really, truly in 76, I should have finished second in the points. I know Marty Smith broke down a lot, and but I beat Billy Grossi a lot. I beat Danny Laporte a lot. I mean, they weren't, they didn't run off from me. We were pretty much equal. Bob Hannon and Marty Smith were in a different class than we were, and Bob Hannon was in his own class.
Sure.
But I should have finished second on the last lap of San Antonio in 1976. I was in third place, and I don't know why I did this. And any young rider listening to me on this podcast, don't do this. The last lap, I looked back. For some reason, I looked back, and I was so tired. I'm in third place. There wasn't anybody around me, and I ran into the fence. I mean, I was so weary after 45 minutes of 100 degrees heat. And the snow fence got caught up on my rear tire with a half a lap to go. And I DNF'd. If I would have gotten those 20 points, I would have finished second behind Bob Hanna in the championship period. Marty Smith would have got third in the points. So I kicked myself. Of course, Marty broke down a lot too, so I'm not trying to say that, I would have beat Marty at that time, but I would have gotten second if I was finished at half a lap. So, anyway,
and tell me about the bike, Steve. I mean, did Cliff White
that was 76. No, 77.
Okay.
So Cliff White called me up. That was 76. I'm sorry, I jumped back there.
That's okay.
So, but I was surprised no factory called me up for 77. And but Cliff White called me and he said, we're putting together a deal with a company called CH Industries, and we'd like for you to ride for us.
Yes.
We'll take care of our expenses. And there wasn't going to be any salary, but they said we'll take care of your expenses and so forth. And that deal was kind of flopping around, and all of a sudden I got a call from Jeff Fox of Motocross Fox. And they said, Steve, we're putting together a full-on team. We're going to make an assault on the 125 National Championship in 77. We'd like for you to ride for us. And what kind of bike do you want? And this, that, and the other. And then they also hired Mark Barnett and Pat Richter.
Mm-hmm.
So Mark Barnett, Pat Richter, and myself were on the Fox team in 1977. And there's a really neat picture of Chuck Tanlin, the mechanic of Fox, and he's in a priest outfit, and Mark Barnett and Pat Richter and myself are, and the mode of that Fox put. You have to have a lot of faith when you work on Sunday. That was kind of the picture. It was a neat picture that I still have one of those hanging here in my house. And but Mark Barnett he got a Suzuki, and I forgot who was Chuck Tanlin, and another man was his mechanic, and Cliff White. And I were kind of talking. I told Motocross Fox, I said, well, I've been talking to Cliff White with CH Industries, but that's not doing real good. And Jeff Fox said, well, we'll hire Cliff, and he'll be your mechanic, and come on with us. And the deal with CH kind of fell through, so I said okay. And so basically, I signed an agreement to ride with Fox there, and they paid for everything. There wasn't any salary involved, but they paid for everything, and it was really a good bike. But I did take the bike from my dad's shop. We had two bikes my dad gave me, and Cliff fixed a 125 CR up, and it was an incredible motorcycle. We used the Fox aluminum frame, of course, the Fox shocks, and Cliff, cut the frame, and put the shocks down, I think 45 degrees or whatever it was, and had Simon's forks on the motorcycle. In the beginning of the year, I did not have the Mugen cylinder, which cost a DNF because Cliff had made the pipe to kind of come up, and the bike had a real high. He had to rev it real high to get the horsepower.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't have much torque, and I had a couple of DNFs that blew the motors up because of that. But then about 3 races in, Terry Mulligan said, "Hey, we'll give you a Mugen motor for that bike," and so they gave us a Mugen motor, and that motor was awesome. And the bike I had in 1977 was probably just as good as a works bike, and I was in the top most of the time, unless the bike broke. I was pretty much in the top 5 or the top 3. Didn't win in Nashville, came close in Houston. Glover and I went at it for both motos, and I went 2-2. But I think I finished 4th in the points that year as well. But that was a great bike. You can see pictures of it all over the place.
Yes.
Joe Newman, he built a replica of that bike, and I think Motocross Fox bought it from him. I think that's in their museum there in California, in Irvine, California.
I think it is. And Joe Newman, speaking of Joe Newman, I'd like to say he does do a fantastic job at building replica bikes, and he's been around a while. I like both Joe and Al very much. Now,
yes.
you did sign with Honda in '78, Steve, and they were a powerhouse team. The talent was really deep. Tell me about that bike in '78, who your mechanic was, and just give me some of the inside information about. I mean, how are parts distributed when you got you, Ellis, Semix, Pomeroy, Smith? You got a big field of guys there. How does all that work?
Well, before I get into that, and I have to say the last race of the year, the Trans Am in '77.
Yeah.
Was Sears Point, and I'm with the Fox group, and I rode the international class that year in '77, and I got about 10th. I never really liked the 500 class very much, and then of course you had the best runners from the whole world around there. But anyway, I'm sitting there in the pits, and all of a sudden I see Terry Mulligan walking toward me, and I tell you, that was one of the greatest sights of my life as a young racer. The Honda team manager coming over to me and asking me if I could be in California,
mm-hmm.
in Los Angeles on Tuesday morning to talk about riding for Team Honda. And so I was, of course, in Compton, California, there, Gardena, Tuesday morning in their offices, and my dad flew in from California on Monday. Flew in from Texas on Monday, and we met with Willie Takeshi and Terry Mulligan, and me and my dad met there in the Honda offices on Tuesday morning after the Trans Am I signed with Honda for '78. So, of course, Warren Reed and I were already pretty good friends,
mm-hmm.
but then Warren invited me to come to California and stay with him and practice and ride with him the first part of January, which I did. And but the first year in Honda, of course, having Marty Smith, the '77 500 national champion, and Tommy Cross and Jim Pomeroy and Jimmy Ells on the team, you're really kind of getting hand-me-downs. So,
yeah. Okay.
For the '78 season, I was signed to ride the 125 class along with Warren, and we got the Works 125s, which I'll talk about that in a second. But on the 250 class, Supercross class, they only allotted the Works bikes to Smith, Croft, Ellis, and Pomeroy. But then, of course, Marty Tripes came into the fray at the very end of that. But Marty was riding a stock CR252 in the beginning.
Tripes was?
Yes, in the very beginning of the '78 series, '78. But Marty Tripes didn't even have a ride in '78. And, of course, Marty and I are very good friends now. We talk all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But Marty did not have a ride in '78. He called up Terry Mulligan. Marty Tripes called up Terry Mulligan and told Terry, if you give me a chance, I can beat Hannah. And that's how all that worked out. And Honda hired Marty at the very last minute in '78. He did not have a works bike in the beginning, but then he won the Atlanta Supercross on the stock CR250, and then they gave him a works bike after that. But I had a stock CR250. Warren Reed had a stock CR250, but the other guys had a Works RC250s.
Now, Steve,
which were not a lot different, but they were, somewhat.
I just want to interrupt you for just a second because we were on the Marty Tripes thing and the Works bike and the production bike. I believe that's the year Tripes won the USGP at Unadilla.
It is.
And at that point, he had to be on a factory bike to beat those guys.
That was a Works bike.
Okay.
Oh, he got a Works bike early on after he showed. The first race in Seattle was the first Supercross race, and Ellis won it. Tripes got second. I was leading there for 10 laps and I fell down. Anyway, but Ellis won and Tripes got second. And then after that, I think Tripes received a Works bike from the team right off the bat because they saw that Tripes was going to be right there. And then he, of course, was the main competition for Bob Hanna in 78.
Mm-hmm. Now, you and Warren are on this 125. Did your factory bikes, did your Works bikes have that 23-inch hoopy front wheel on it too?
They came with the 23. They did.
Did you like it, or you got rid of that thing right away?
Warren Reed liked it, but
yeah.
I did not like it. And so I switched to the 21.
Were there frame modifications too at that point, like many people have suggested?
No, we didn't do any frame modifications on that. Switching to the 21. Just, of course, probably drop the forward stems a little bit in the forwards just to kind of even up the balancing,
right.
Compared because of 23 to the 21. But, I just didn't care for the 23 from right off the bat. But Warren won a national on that bike with the 23, and I got second that day behind him in Connecticut, Rhode Island, I believe it was. Warren won the 125 national that year on that bike, and but it was a pretty good bike. It couldn't compete with the Yamaha and the horsepower though. Toward the end of the year, we finally got it running better, but it took a while for it to really have the horsepower that Brock had at that time. At
that time, Steve, were you serious about training, or did you just ride a lot? What was your discipline like? Did you run? Did you lift weights? What did you do to stay in shape?
Joe, I wish I could say that I really trained hard, but I was not one of those that would get up and run all the time. Later in our career, I'm kind of jumping ahead, but Bob Hanna and I owned a ranch together, and I became good friends with Bob for a while. And Bob and I were together quite a bit. And Bob would get up and run 10 miles, and I'd run 2 or 3. So, I wasn't much of a trainer. I didn't like it. I rode a lot, though. I did ride quite a bit.
Well, Steve, your honesty is refreshing. People like to hear that. I've had a couple of people on that have said that. No, I didn't think really that much about it. And you have other guys that say, yeah, this is what I did, and that's what they had to do to ride at that level. I want to ask you about another bike that was very, very interesting. Some people had questions about it. I often wondered about it. There was an RC Honda that was a really fast revving bike. It had a full drain battery ignition. What was that bike about, and what made it so different than other factory bikes?
Well, that was 1979, and you talk about how parts are distributed, or bikes are distributed. At that time in '79, I was the leading Honda rider in the points. I got second in Oakland. I got third in Seattle, behind Hanna, and 79. Weinert won the Oakland event. So Weinert and Hanna were going at it, but I was in third place at the points. I was right there. Mm-hmm. So I was the leading Honda rider. Well, at Daytona, we were in Daytona. I remember this Honda gets shipped to Daytona, and they gave me the bike because I was the leading Honda rider. I was on the points leading. So of course we had Marty Smith, and we still had top riders on the team there, but the other guys. So I got the bike, and it was a RC250 that had a battery on it, and it had a longer stroke motor than the ones that were normally ride at 78. So the motor it was more of a throaty. It was a torquier bike, mm-hmm. But it was a little heavier for some strange reason. It had a heavier feel to it, it was very, very torquey. It had great torque. It was very good on hard pack tracks, but on the sandy tracks where I didn't like it as much. And I got second on it behind Bob Hanna both nights in the Astrodome in 1979, and Hanna beat me by a bike length the second night. And the bike seemed great on hard pack tracks, but then we got on the outdoors. I didn't like the feel of it so much, or on the sand. And then the Supercross that I won in '79 in New Orleans, I went back to the old motor, in the same frame of the old motor, the motor that just had a different rev limiting on it,
Mm-hmm.
and it felt lighter. Even if it wasn't lighter, it felt lighter. And sometimes that happens. The way the motor works and everything, the bike has a bit of feel to it. And I liked the older motor at that time. So, but the bike was good, but I didn't use it very much. I only used it about 4 races.
Steve, you just mentioned Supercross. You did have a win there, and I wanted to know if you liked riding Supercross back then, or what your feelings were on that, about Supercross in those days.
Oh, of course, Joe, we loved it. The strange thing was, my dad and I were on a vacation in California in 1973. Really kind of strange.
Mm-hmm.
Or was it 72, anyway. We're driving down the freeway, and we had our pittance in the back, and we see this big sign, first ever Super Bowl of motocross. So I was in the audience accidentally for that race watching Marty Traps win, and I'm 14 years old, or barely turned 15. And so from the very beginning, of course, we were all fascinated by Supercross and being able to become a world-class top pro in my life. I'm so thankful. And going to Supercross races and going down the floor and being interviewed. And it was just such a thrill and a rush. And I love Supercross races. And this race in Houston last night was the first Supercross race I've missed in my life at Houston. In my life, I've been to that race from the very beginning. They ever had it, and this was the first year I ever missed that race because of COVID.
Sure.
But anyway, so
sure.
they're not giving any VIP passes out and everything. So I said, well, I'll watch it on TV with my dad. But I love Supercross. I love it. Yeah, it's great.
When you race, Steve, who would you say was the toughest guy to pass? And once you passed him, who was a real pain in the neck and just wouldn't stop nipping at your heels?
Well, Joe, that's a real tough one. I saw a picture of the San Diego Supercross in 1980, the picture of the start. And I started looking down the line of all the riders that were on that starting line at the San Diego race. And of course, you could have other races too, like this too. But every one of the riders on that starting line for the main event in San Diego had either won or were going to win the Supercross event.
Mm.
Every one of them. And I thought, wow, how I ride. That's such a great picture to see each rider on their head had won or was going to win the Supercross in their career. And so, Joe, really, truly, every one of those cotton pickers.
Yeah.
Every one of them were tough to pass, and as well as I've heard people. I heard Brock Glover say that I was one of the toughest guys to pass. So I read that in an article. I kind of laughed about that. But when you're a top pro, Joe, it's every one of those guys is challenging and awesome riders.
We were talking about Supercross there for a minute, Steve, and I'd like to go back to that. You say you missed the one in Houston last night, but let's talk a little about the obstacles, the track, how they're laid out today, and the format. Do you think it's a bit too dangerous? Do you think it's become too jumpy? And do you think the format, do you think it could be improved? Or give me your thoughts on Supercross overall.
Well, we all have our opinions, and of course, my opinion, of course, comes from the past, so to speak. But if there's a video on YouTube of the race that I won in New Orleans, or it's on my website too, the New Orleans Supercross. And that track was all sand, and just had 2 or 3 different lines in each corner, and not all the big banks and things like that. In my opinion, in my humble opinion, I love watching the races today, but I think there's way too many banks. I think there's too much banking. I think they ought to make, but that makes it faster, of course. But if they want to slow the lap, last night the lap time was 49 seconds a lap. They could slow the lap times down by not having all the banks all the time and make it to where the riders have to make berms, real literal berms, like, little bitty things you got to get your wheels into, that really sets people apart from time to time. And I wish they would do that more. I'm not really a fan of all the jumps. You're sure you're going to have a lot of them, but I think it takes away a little bit from the braking, from the person that really is able to brake harder and maybe take better throttle control. I wish they'd change it a little bit, but I still enjoy it no matter what, and I don't really have much opinion about it other than that would be it.
Well,
if you watch that New Orleans race on YouTube, you can see that track was awesome.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're going to be talking about a different format of racing that you did in just a moment. We will be talking about some TT riding that you did and a 480 that your friend Jim Strait set up for you. But first, I mean, you raced an interesting event that had one of the largest television audiences in the history of ABC's Wide World of Sports between 79 and 81. And of course, I'm speaking about the Superbikers. How were you chosen to be the Honda entry in 1979 for that race?
Well, that race, it went to like 86 or 87.
Yes.
It went on through, yeah, and yeah, it was an incredible race, incredible, fun sport. Now, it's too bad it didn't continue to go. I think in Europe they're still doing it, but it didn't really, for some reason, I haven't really caught on that big. I don't know why. But anyway, 1979, what happened, the race came along, and the team manager was Gunnar Lindstrom at that time from Honda, and Gunnar's a great guy. And he asked me, hey, would you like to ride this event? I said, sure, I'd love to do it. Well, we show up there, and Ken Howerton and Warren Reed have these big disc brakes on their bike, and here we are there with an RC 480 that had, drum brakes. And I mean, I lost, my brakes went out on the first lap. So, I mean, I ended up getting like 6th or 7th, somewhere around there. And really didn't put much stock into it. Of course, Kent Howerton won the very first Superbikers event. And so then the next year come around, and Honda said, hey, would you like to ride that event again? I said, yeah, but give me a bike with disc brakes. Well, they said, we're not going to just do that. We're going to have a special motor for 1980 come over. And they sent a special motor, and they gave me a bike that was absolutely incredible in 1980. And then, of course, Andre Malherbe came over, the 500 world champion came over. You had Ken Howerton, Kenny Roberts, Freddie Spencer. All the best top riders around the world were there, really. And, of course, I mean, we didn't, Bob Hanna didn't want to do it. I talked to Marty Smith about it. Marty Smith said, I'd never get on a bike like that. Marty Smith had no desire to do that. But I enjoyed it. And that bike in 1980 was incredible. And, of course, Ken Howerton was in that event. He'd won the year before. And I probably had 5 or 6 horsepower on him and easily passed him and pulled away. But then that race is also on YouTube as well. But about 6 laps to go on that race, which was a 12-lap race, I had a huge lead, and I lost my rear brake. For some reason, the rear brake went out. And I only had a front brake the last 6 laps of that race. And Andre Malherbe caught me. I had a 12-second lead. He caught me on the last lap. And I barely won that event. But, having only a front brake coming into the dirt wasn't really that much fun.
Sure.
But so then we jumped to 1981. I had the same bike pretty much from 1980 to 81, which was an incredible motorcycle. It was a Works RC 500 with disc brakes and the road racing rain tires, and they lowered the bike down, of course, and the motor was phenomenal. The motor was so much horsepower. And I won pretty easily in 1981. Graham Noyce got second. Eddie Lawson got third. Pretty much thankfully I was able to win that race handily. And then so come 1982, and Gavin Tripp, the promoter of that event, we had dominated the last 2 years. He said, you know what, you guys can't run that same bike, that Works bike. You guys need to start off with the production bikes because you need to run the production motor because it's not fair. That bike's too powerful. Well, but it was really a loose rule. There wasn't any real set rules. You come pretty much run what you show up with. We had Jay Springsteen, Ricky Graham on the XR 750s. You had Bubba Schobert on a Can-Am. It was just pretty much run what you bring.
Yeah.
But Gavin told us, you all need to have the stock CR, not the Works bike like you've been riding. You need to have the stock CR. So we were kind of put in a place where we had the stock CR. Well, this of course is in 1982. And I went from the motocross team to the road race team. And from 81 to 82, I became a road racer in 82.
Yes.
And that's another story we can talk about. But we're at the Superbikers. Well, I'm a road racer now, and I really didn't ride any motocross. I knew nothing about what's going on in the motocross team. And so my mechanics were Mike Velasco and Merlin Plumley. God bless Merlin. He's no longer with us. Great guy. Merlin and Mike Velasco were fantastic mechanics and great guys. And they really didn't even know they never really worked on a motocross bike, and here I have a CR480 at the race, and you know, Danny Magoo and I think Andre Mallard was there. They were in the motocross team. They were kind of pitted, 20 yards away from us. It was kind of like two different teams. It was really kind of weird. I'm on the road racing team, and I'm the only one. Of course, they're on the road racing team, but I have a stock CR 480 that my road racing mechanics were doing the best they could to make it, what it was. And I noticed on Saturday, I flew in Friday, and I found out, and I didn't even know this, but I found out the motocross team had been practicing all day Thursday at the Carlsbad Raceway. Danny and Andre had been practicing Thursday, and I wasn't told that. I didn't know anything about it. And so I flew in on Friday, and I get there Saturday practicing, and man, I noticed, God, Danny's flying by me, and Andre were going by me down the straightaway, and I began complaining. I said, man, something's wrong with my bike. I need a new motor. What's going on here? And but nobody, they just kind of ignored me, and I didn't know what was happening. I was complaining to my mechanics. I said, man, my bike, it's not up to snuff with those motocross bikes over there. What's going on? And they said, we have no idea. We have no idea what's going on. And so I said, well, all right. I complained to Roger. I complained to Dave. I complained to everybody. And this story is not known by many people. And I'm going to just say this right up front. Danny Magoo was an incredible rider. But
Yeah.
that day in Carlsbad in 1982, of course, we know the race, and it's on YouTube. It's a real popular event. I've had a lot of people message me and send me stuff and say, Magoo just smoked you, and yes, he did. He beat me, no doubt about it. That year was a great year for Danny. He won the Motocross of Nations and Trophy of Nations. He won the Carlsbad GP, I believe, and then he won the Superbike. So he had a great year. God bless Danny as well. And I trust that we're going to see him in heaven one day.
Mm-hmm.
So we come to the main event, and of course I won the road race heat race easily. The main event, Danny, I got off the line about third, and Danny accidentally hit my back wheel coming into the turn, and he must have hit me perfectly because it didn't mess him up at all. And you can see it on the video, and it almost spun me around. And so I was like 10th place coming out of the first turn. And you had Ricky Graham, Jay Springsteen, and Danny, and Bubba Schobert in there somewhere too. And so I kind of had to work my way up. And after about 5 laps, I'd kind of got back up to the front lead at the pack, and I caught everybody. And then Danny had the lead by now. I caught Danny. And then I passed Danny in the dirt. And he came flying by me on the straightaway. And I'm like, going, what is going on here? And I knew, he'd been doing that on Saturday too. And I passed him again in the dirt. And then the famous picture of me looking back on the left-hand side, and he goes by me probably 5 miles an hour faster on the right-hand side.
Yes.
And I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. And I remember looking back, and I didn't see him on the left. I'm thinking, okay, he must have fallen down. I've got the race won. And I felt it pass me on the right hand side. I went, oh man! And I looked over there, and then there was only like 3 laps to go in the race, and then I was right there with him. And I got in his draft, and he would actually outpull me when I'm in his draft. I'm going, what? And I couldn't believe it. And that didn't happen. When you're in someone's draft, if you've got an equal bike, you normally are able to pull up on them and get by them easily.
Sure.
If you're equal, but you could see it on the race there on the Wireless Sports televised event that I couldn't even pull up at all in the draft. And I'm going, man. Anyway, so the last lap, I'm right behind him, and then I really went into the chicane hard, and I slammed against a hay bale, and I smashed my pipe in. And so the last lap, I didn't have any horsepower, and he ended up winning the race. And when I got second, I remember complaining to Sam Posey there in the winner's circle area because I don't know what the deal was, but man, Danny had a lot more horsepower on me. I don't know why, but, So anyway, it kind of gets brushed over, and that all brushes over, and everything's cool, and you go on and live life and all that. And 20 years later, Cliff White sees me at the Supercross at Texas Stadium, and he calls me over to the pits, He said, Steve, come over here, because I was walking around the pit area. He said, I've been wanting to tell you something for 20 years. You're not going to believe. I said, what? He goes, Danny had the Works 500 motor in his bike, and you had the stock 480 motor in your bike. And I went, what? And I knew that Works 500 motor from the 2 years before.
Yeah,
it was incredible. And I was riding. I mean, my mechanics did the best I could, and I don't know what they did as far as, I'm sure it was ported and all that. I'm sure it was, but it was pretty much a stock RC 480 motor. And Danny had that special motor from California that they'd flown in, and he probably had 5 to 7 horsepower on me on that race.
And you didn't know that for 20 years, huh?
I didn't know it for 20 years. And I know people are going to, I have got so many letters and emails and people yell, Magoo smoked you, and I haven't said anything really. But I will say this, Norm DeWitt did an article in Sackle magazine probably 10 years ago, and he was talking to Dave Arnold, and Dave actually admitted, saying they were there on Thursday, they were changing motors and finding out which motor was the best for Danny, and I didn't even know they were testing on Thursday.
Yeah,
I was on the road race team, so I didn't even know it. So anyway, and however people take that, by no means am I trying to take away from Danny Magoo's ability. No. He was a fantastic rider, but that's the story, and that's the truth.
Oh, it happened, Steve, and I've known other factory guys who have said, at the same time I was on that team, this guy was getting this, and I was only getting that. It does happen, and hey, life goes on. We're going to talk about you. We're going to talk about your road racing career in a minute, Steve. But first, I want to know more about what possessed you to try and take a shot. And you did well. You finished on the podium at the Houston Astrodome at a TT race on a Honda CR 480.
Well, that was a wild event. There's another wild story behind that. But after I'd won the Superbikers 2 years in a row, actually, the Honda road racing team manager was a man named Udo Giedel, great guy, and Freddie Spencer was on the road race team, and he was going to go to Europe for '82. Freddie Spencer was moving from America to Europe to race in the World Championships Grand Prix against Kenny Roberts and so forth. And Honda was looking at other road racers. You had Doug Poland, you had a few other road racers in America that were probably on their radar. And I wasn't even thinking anything. I wasn't thinking anything. And Udo Giedel called me up and said, Steve, we want to talk to you about becoming a Honda road racer. I said, what? They said, we watched you on the Superbikers event, and you were incredible on the pavement, and which I was. I was very good on the pavement at that time. And we said, we want to fly you out here to Willow Springs and have you ride a Honda road racer. And we're going to try to get the rules changed at the AMA at the annual meeting to get them changed to where you can become a road racer or a Grand National Championship rider, whatever. So Dave Arnold and Udo Giedel were in the AMA annual meeting, rules meeting in Ohio, and they proposed a rule that they said we want to make it to where any top rider could jump around from any class. In other words, come from motocross to road race. Well, nobody had known what we were trying to do. Nobody knew our plan at all. This was a plan, and if that rule could get changed, Honda was going to hire me on to be a road racer, as well as I was going to do the TTs, which we talked about that as well.
Yeah.
Well, nobody knew we were planning that, but and guess what? The rule got changed. There were a few people that opposed it. In fact, one guy, Dave Arnold told me, one guy that opposed it, when they brought this, they wanted to get the rule changed, and they brought this up. One guy stood up and said, no, we can't change that rule because guys like Steve Wise will be coming and racing over the TTs against us, Grand National Championship guys. Well, that's exactly what we were planning. But anyway, but the rule got changed, and so I show up there in the Astrodome with it was a stock CR 480 in the Astrodome, and Mike Velasco and Merlin Plumley were mechanicking on it for me as well. They were my road racing mechanics, but Jimmy Strait, my friend, the guy that had built my national winning CR 125 and 76, he was there too, and he was helping them, and he was as good or like I said, better than any factory mechanic I ever knew. But so they kind of put two head gaskets in that bike and trying to lower the compression because it was the compression when you come around those turns, the motor would try to stall sometimes. And it was, we did everything we could to that bike to make it competitive, and it was. For that race, it was competitive. And the reason why is they had a big jump in the middle of the track. And not all TTs have that, but they had a huge jump in the middle of the track, which I would hit wide open and fly forever. You had to be head and shoulders above everybody. But that was pretty much a stock 480s. All it was kind of lowered down and a few little changes. It wasn't any big deal.
But you did get on the podium that night.
I did. And I'm going to say this, and very few people know this, but everybody thinks I won that race. Everybody thinks I won. And I mean, everybody that I talked to think I won that race. But I probably would have won it, but here's what happened. I was in the back row for the main event, and I came all the way to the pack, and I caught Ricky Graham with 2 laps to go. And I would have probably, I mean, I'm just saying, this is my opinion, I probably would have passed Ricky on the big jump fairly easily. He was an XR 750 Harley Davidson. And then my rear brake cable broke with 2 laps to go. And Mickey Fay passed me back, and so I got third that night.
Did you race any other TTs, Steve?
I did, but a CR 2-stroke is not competitive like at Peoria.
Right.
I got like 8th place at Peoria, and I went to Santa Fe. I think I got like 8th, 7th or 8th at Santa Fe. And Ascot, I didn't make the main event. I mean, Ascot's a half-mile track. didn't even make the main. I don't think I made the main at Ascot. But it was, a 500 2-stroke or 480 at the time. It's not going to be able to compete with a 4-stroke that puts the traction down much better on those big wide turns, especially a half-mile track.
Well, let's move on to your road racing thing now, Steve. I mean, you went out there and you started racing what, Formula One?
Well, after when Honda signed me in the beginning, they signed me only to ride super bike, but then Daytona came around. I did ride the Formula One. Let's see, my first professional race. Where was it? Let's see, that was Daytona.
Okay.
Daytona 1982. Daytona, my first professional road race, and I'd never road raced in my life. I did one local road race in Bryan, Texas, on a 1100 Suzuki. My dad was a Suzuki dealer also, and I pulled a 1100 Suzuki off the floor and went, and I got second or something, I think, behind one of the guys that dominated. I think they called him a Hogman. It was what was his name? Anyway, but I didn't know anything about road racing. I got second on the first local Texas race, and it was just on the stock, Suzuki. But so I go to Daytona, and I'm on the front row. And I will say, though, our bikes were incredible. That Works 1100 bike that they built, the super bike, was so fast. And I was running right with Eddie Lawson and Roberto Pietri in third place, and I got carried away and ran off the track. I got carried off. I didn't really know the draft. I got sucked into the draft, and I'm running third place and all around a group of guys, and I overshot the first turn and went off into the dirt at about 150 miles an hour. So I'm out there in the dirt standing up thinking, oh, Lord, I hope there's no bumps out here. And I turned around, and by the time I got back on the track, and it kind of messed my bike up for some reason. I don't know why, but after I ran off in the dirt, my bike started having head shakes, head wobbles, and then the rest of the race, it would wobble the whole time. I couldn't go wide open down the straightaway, so I think I got 8th place. But then the next race after that was Talladega, and I finished second behind Eddie Lawson.
Yeah.
And my very second road race, I finished second behind Eddie. And but going back there to the Daytona event, Marco Lucanelli was the 500 world champion. He had flown over from Italy to race the Daytona 200, but the bikes that Freddie Spencer and Mike Baldwin had, what was called the FWS 1000, the V4. It's a V4, and it was a fantastic motorcycle. And the only bike they had left was a Formula One inline, which was called a Milwaukee inline 4-stroke. Was was a couple years old. And Marco Lucanelli said, I'm not riding that bike. And he said, I'm flying back to Italy. And so the bike was there. And I wasn't planning on riding the Formula One race. But Udo said, hey, would you like to ride the Formula One class? We've got a bike for you. I said, yeah, let's go. And I ended up getting sixth place, I believe it was, in my first ever Daytona 200. And because of my third place in Houston and sixth place in Daytona, I'm leading the Grand National Points Championship.
Yeah.
So I'm leading the points. And Gene Romero called me up. Gene Romero was the Grand National team manager with Mike Kidd and Terry Poovey. And Gene called me up and wanted me to come to Santa Fe and ride the mile on the Honda, the I forget what they call it, but the Honda flat tracker. And I wasn't contracted to do that, and I don't know why. I wish I would have now, but I just told Gene, no, I'm not going to do that. He called me 4 times. Come out here, we're going to test, and you can test with Mike Kidd and Terry Poovey. We're going to be testing, and I just said, no, I don't want to do it. I'm going to concentrate on road racing. And of course, hindsight's 2020, and I wish I would have done that, but God bless Gene, and anyway, so I didn't do that. But I did race the other TTs, but I wasn't really competitive in the other TT events other than the Houston event.
Yeah. But what was the year you finished just a couple of points behind Kenny Roberts and a few other top names? Was that in Formula One?
That was my first year in the Formula One National Championship in America.
Yeah.
That wasn't the World Championship. Kenny and Freddie were in Europe, but I finished second to Mike Baldwin in the Formula One Championship, and I was leading the championship series up into the very last race. And the last race of the Formula One Championship was in Sears Point. And if anybody knows Sears Point, if we have any road racers listening to me that race Sears Point, you'll know that Sears Point was a very tough, dangerous track, very dangerous track. Had cliffs on the, you could either run into a cliff or fall off a cliff if you made a mistake in certain areas. And I don't know what it's like now, but that's the way it was back then when I raced. And that event, if Mike Baldwin won, I had to get second to win the national championship. And but there was a 3-time national champion named Wes Cooley that stood in my way, and Eddie Lawson was there as well, Wayne Rainey, and there was other riders as well. There was a real good local rider, privateer, Harry Kleinsman. Harry was a great rider, and Thad Wolf were great riders. They were riding privateer Suzuki's, but they were very competitive. But in that race, Mike Baldwin got the lead, and Wes Cooley's in second, and I'm in third. And the whole race, I couldn't get past Wes, and here I am in a road race, and I'm knowing that I have to pass Wes on a very, very dangerous track. And I almost killed us twice. And I thought, no, you know what? It's not worth it. So I couldn't get by Wes. And Wes, of course, he'd been road racing all his life, and here's my first year road racing. And so I got second in the points. And I told you one of my greatest, proudest parts of racing is that in 1981, I'm dicing with Bob Dicing. I'm beating Bob Hanna at Unadilla in the 250 Grand Prix.
Yeah.
In 1981. In 1982, I'm on the front line with Kenny Roberts, Freddie Spencer, Randy Mamola, Wes Cooley, and myself at the Laguna Seca National in 1982. So to do that, to be world class in the motocross event in 1981, and then world class in the road racing event in 1982, it gives me lots of pride. I'm so thankful I was able to do that.
You were blessed, no question about it. The only other guy that even comes to mind is Dick Mann when I think of versatility of a road racer, a motocrosser, a flat tracker. Certainly a pioneer, Dick Mann. Supermoto, Steve. Are you sad that thing came and went quick?
Well, I don't know why, but it didn't seem to catch on for some reason. Or Gavin Tripp dropped the...
No, Supermoto, like what we've seen recently with KTMs and the big tires, and it was here for a while, and it seemed to have gone away.
Yeah, amazingly, it went away in the racing world, but man, you see them all over the streets and all over the trails and everything else. I mean, that phenomenon that Gavin Tripp started, it hit off into the secular world, and the racing the riders love those bikes. They love them. They're huge bikes.
Yeah.
Big selling event. And I'm really surprised that there's not a racing event that would surround that type of motorcycle. I don't even know the names of what they call touring bike. What are they called? Some tours. But anyway,
adventure bikes. Some of them call
adventure bikes.
I don't know.
Surprised.
Yeah, I'm not sure that has. I'm not sure that has a lot to do with supermoto, but I think adventure bike is something that has gone in a different direction, and a lot of manufacturers seem to be jumping on that as well. So, hey, Steve, what do you think was your most memorable race and why?
Well, of course, I've had quite a few of them, but God, I don't know. I couldn't. I mean, all of them. Every one of them that I won. So
yeah.
I think I won seven world-class events. So I guess, of course, Bob Hanna won 27 Supercrosses. I won one. And of course, I won the Canadian Supercross where there were factory riders there, but it wasn't on the docket yet of the AMA. Bob Hanna wasn't there, but other factory riders were. But I did win that event in '78, the Supercross in Moulton Stadium in Montreal. But, so, I mean, I guess any one of those seven could be great. Each one of them had their special appeal. I mean,
yes.
Kaiser's Ridge, Maryland, barely beat Marty Smith the last lap. The New Orleans race, the Supercross in New Orleans, past Jimmy Leinert with 2 laps to go. The road race that I won, and I won the National Road Race event in Mid-Ohio. And that race was, I won that I had a good lead there, which is nice. It's always nice when you have a lead and you can cruise the last 2 laps. So
sure.
It's each one of those events were special to me, Joe. But as well as the many, many local events that were people, really and truly what makes motocross to me back in the day especially was the people, the fans, and the friends that I made in the racing world have been phenomenal.
Yeah. Well, Steve, I ask everyone who I've interviewed, obviously everyone, about their career in racing. And I always ask them what they're doing today. And I know with certainty you are the only motocrossing pastor I've ever had on my show. When did you start to attend seminary school, Steve, or Bible college? When did that begin?
Well, Joe, I don't know how much more time you have here, but basically I was just like any other rider. I was friends with all the factory riders. We were wild young hellions that had Porsches. I mean, I was the only person that had a Porsche in McAllen at the time. I had a Porsche, I had an airplane, I had a jet boat, I had my own house.
Yeah.
Here at 22 years old, I thought I pretty much was pretty cool in myself, but a time came in my life, Joe, through a series of circumstances where I just was so empty in my heart, and I just was. I'll never forget. I would sit in my house sometimes all alone, and I would just say to myself, "Is this all there is?" I had money in the bank. Things you think that everybody would think that they would want, to make them happy, to bring the American dream and everything. But I had a grandmother that prayed for me all the time, and she would always tell me. My grandmother would always tell me, "Steve, one day you're going to serve the Lord." And the way she'd point her finger at me, she'd say, "One day you're going to serve the Lord." And I'd go, "Yeah, Pearl." While I'm flying a girlfriend in to stay with me. I mean, I was like any other young man that like that. So, but I found myself, Joe, empty and just thinking, life is passing me by, and here, of course, I'm 22 years old, right? And then I had another friend that used to always tell me, "Steve, you need to give your life to Jesus Christ.
Mm-hmm.
You need to give your life to Christ." And I would go, "Yeah, right, sure." And I wouldn't think much about it. But then a time came in the end of 1981, and strangely enough, the '81 team that won the first ever motocross, the Nation, Supercross the Nations, which was Chuck Son, Donnie Hansen, Danny Laporte, and Johnny O'Mara.
Yes. Well,
guess what? I was supposed to be on that team.
Were you? Yes,
but I crashed the weekend before we were all going to Europe. I crashed in California on a 450 going uphill. I endowed the bike going uphill. We were testing some shocks, and I hurt my ribs real bad, and I could not be on the team. Somebody by the name of Johnny O'Mara took my place. And I don't know if you know who that is or not, Joe.
I recognize the name. I recognize the name.
Yeah, I think so. I think we all do. And I don't think Johnny made one point on that race. I think Johnny DNF'd and crashed, and he was a rookie at Team Honda that year. And of course, there's a whole other story behind that. But I got through winning the Unadilla. I won the second motor, the Unadilla Grand Prix in New York just a month earlier, and I was back on my game in '81, riding really good, and beat all the Europeans in Unadilla, beat Hannah. The Grand Prix in Unadilla, I was winning the first moto. My rear shock went away with 3 laps left, and I got fourth the first moto, and then I won the second moto handily, and I got second overall behind Neil Hudson. But I never ever saw any Europeans the whole time. They were pretty much behind us, and so I was invited to be on that team to go to Europe, and I got hurt. And the weekend that I should have been in Bilstein, Germany with the team was my weekend where I realized I needed a change in my life. And a friend of mine named Sam Galvan told me, he said, Steve, if you will ask Jesus Christ to come into your life,
right,
you'll be changed. You'll be changed. And he told me, I didn't know what the Bible said anything, but he said, you will be born anew. You will have a brand new spirit, and God will change you. You don't have to try to make it happen. You don't have to change yourself. God will change you, Steve. Because I was always taught in Christianity, you had to follow, or I was always taught, being in the Bible Belt, you had to follow all these laws and everything to go to heaven. You had to be perfect and all this kind of stuff. And I knew I couldn't be perfect, Joe. I knew that my life had a lot of flaws in it. But I didn't know that Jesus Christ had taken my place, had become my sacrifice for me. If I believed in him, it's that God would see us through like the filter of Jesus Christ, of his blood. It's like he's like the filter, because we're not perfect and we'll never be perfect in this life. We always have flaws. We'll always be flawed mankind. And but I didn't know that. But when Sam told me, Steve, just receive Christ and he will change you, and he'll give you a peace and a joy and a strength that you've never known. And on the night when I should have been in Bilstein, Germany, August 29th, 1981, in the middle of my living room floor, not in a church, Sam was at my house through a series of circumstances, and he led me to Christ, Joe. He said, Steve, just say this prayer with me. Just said, Jesus, forgive me of my past sins and come into my life to take over. That's all I did, Joe.
That's all you have to. Yeah, and that's all you have to do is take that first step. Steve.
That's it. That's it.
Did you go to seminary school shortly after that, or how were you class taught to be a pastor?
That was right before I went into road racing. That was in 1981, and I went into road racing, and I was a born again, spirit filled Christian going into my road racing year of 1982. And I was, then I got married real quickly after that. I had to get married, and anyway, so I didn't have to get married because she's pregnant. I just wanted to get married, so I got married, and anyway, then I road raced for a year and a half, and then I got hurt really bad in the middle of the 1983 year when I was winning the Formula One championship. And I had another year on my contract, and I lost the eye of the tiger, Joe, and I just didn't have any desire to race anymore. And actually, I'll never forget when Udo Giedel walked into my hospital room in Monterey, California. I got hurt real bad at Laguna. I told Udo, I said, you know what, Udo, I don't have the desire to race anymore. I still had another year on my contract. I decided I'm going to quit. And I quit at the end of 1983. I hung up my leathers. So I was a Christian then, and it was all concerns we could go to there. But I did end up moving to Dallas in 1984 to go into Bible school, and I went to Bible school for a while. But God, I just didn't hit off with some of the things there, and it seemed kind of boring to me, and that was just my opinion, And I moved back to McAllen. I got into real estate. I had my real estate license. I got that early on, and I got into that, and I would speak here and there, give my testimonies here and there at Full Gospel Businessmen's and churches and youth groups and things like that for many years. And then, over a period of time, I just kind of gravitated into it and had some challenging times in life and so forth. And I went through a divorce 12 years ago, or 11 years ago. But anyway, everything's cool now. But I decided about 2 years ago, I'm gonna really kind of dedicate my life more to the ministry, and that's pretty much all I do now. And
Yeah. Well, your spiritual gift is evangelism, Steve. There's no question about that.
Sure.
You're great at spreading the word. Not everybody has that spiritual gift, but you certainly do. And you know, there is a question that I've always wanted to ask you, regardless of whether you were going to be on this little show or not. And I'm going to ask it to you right now. What do you feel is the number one reason unbelievers or those with little to no faith tend to turn away from God?
Well, the Bible talks about how God pricks the heart and God draws people. And so I don't know how that'll work specifically exactly, but I would probably say because sometimes, like what happened to me in my early Christian life, we become too religious,
yes.
too judging other people,
yes.
because you're not doing, too condemning,
mm-hmm.
instead of loving people, instead of just being full of the joy of the Lord and showing people the joy of Christ. Jesus said this. He said that the people, if we love one another, people will see that. He said that, and that's the way people are drawn to Christ, is by our love. I think it says, I will draw them into myself by your love. That's what Jesus said. By love, people are drawn to Christ. And Paul talked about it specifically. He said it's the goodness of God that leads someone to change, leads someone to be have a born again life or change spiritual. And so I would say that question that you asked me, Joe, is sometimes we are full of pride and we think we are, God's gift to the world, instead of being humble and realize, you know what? It's by God's grace that I'm even saved.
Yes,
it's
all
by
of
God's
us.
grace I'm even loved.
Yeah.
So, and I had to learn that, Joe. I kind of got sucked up into a certain religious group in my early Christian life, and it's a big turnoff to people when we're trying to demand laws. And what I realize now too, and of course, I realized this is a young man, but I didn't put into practice so much. I couldn't change myself, Joe. I couldn't change myself.
No.
I couldn't stop lusting after women. I couldn't stop lying and cheating and different things like that. Mm-hmm. It's the Spirit of God that gives us strength to do that. And I'll never forget when I made that prayer on August 29th, 1981, in the middle of my living room floor. This is one thing I said to God. I said, God, you know that I can't do this on my own. You know what kind of a man I am. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to ask you to help me to do it. And Joe, I can tell you 35 years later, I've made some mistakes. I've fallen down. I have endowed at times in life. But God never forsakes us. We've given our life to Christ. He's going to be there forever. He's going to lead us and guide us and direct us. But the most important thing is, like what you said earlier, we've got to take that first step by asking Jesus Christ to come into our life and to fill us with His Holy Spirit and to lead us and guide us. And He promises He'll do that.
Amen to that, brother. I got one more question for you, Steve, and it's back to motocross. And you were teammates with both Jim Pomeroy and Marty Smith, who are no longer with us. Sadly, Nancy Smith, of course, is no longer with us as well. I'd like you to tell us what you remember most about Jim Pomeroy and Marty Smith.
Well, I never, Jimmy was only on the team 1 year, and he was gone in '79. And I never really was close to Jimmy, but we would talk here and there. He was always just such a fun-loving, happy guy, and my memories of Jimmy Pomeroy are all good, all great, and what a great rider he was as well in his career. Mm-hmm. I only knew really '78 was I around him, all the time at the races, and but I don't have really any direct memories right off the bat with Jimmy, such as Steve Sackelwood or of course Arnie Beeman. I got on his show a bit with Arnie Beeman there, and what a great guy he is too, and. But Marty Smith, I have a lot more memories of Marty, but of course racing memories, and but the facts are, Joe, the truth is, in 1975, 76, and 77, every rider wanted to be Marty Smith.
Yeah.
Maybe except Bob Hanna. but everybody wanted to be Marty Smith. I mean, and one of my good friends, Lee Ramage, is a good friend of mine, and Lee is actually going to be on my show this coming Tuesday. But Lee was really Marty's best friend, for many, many years.
Yes.
And Lee and I talk often now. But of course, Lee was with Marty and Nancy in that tragic day.
Yes.
Lee and Tammy were with him. But Marty Smith, we were never really good friends, but we were friends. And when I did live in San Diego for a short time, because I moved and lived with Marty Tribes for the fall of '78, I moved out there, and we would ride with Marty Smith. Me and Tribes would ride with Marty Smith from time to time, and I would go to Marty's house from time to time, for maybe a get together, whatever, a barbecue or something. But Marty was a great guy, and Marty and I, though we were never close, like I said, and Marty and I had some run-ins, as far as me beating him in Kaiser's Ridge on a privateer bike, and then I know apparently I was involved in the crash he had, and when he broke his hip, somehow maybe I think we tied up. Or I heard somebody told me, or I heard that he'd said that, and we got tied up or something, or banged, and so I think I might have had something to do with him getting hurt the last of his career. I don't know, I don't remember, but I've heard and I've read that somewhere in a few interviews. But Marty and I were never close. But the funny thing is, we stayed in touch, and I would talk to Marty like once a year, which is kind of strange. And our conversations were no longer than 5 minutes. I'll never forget. And then toward the end of 2019, it was kind of funny. And because Lee Ramage, and Lee's a fellow Christian brother, Lee and Marty were best of friends, talked all the time.
Oh yeah.
And Lee would talk to Marty, and Marty grew up as a Catholic. Marty was a good guy. But Marty was like all of us young Hellions do in his early days and so forth. But Marty got married and grown up, and with Nancy, Precious Nancy, and so forth. But Marty and I were talking at the end of November, and it seemed like Marty had kind of, I don't know, befriended me more for some reason. I don't know. But the end of November, I was going to go to California. Back in 2019, I was going to go to California for Marty Tribe's event. And Marty Smith and I were talking. He called me up, and he said, "Hey, when you're out here, come on over. We'll have a steak. Nancy will cook us a big dinner. We'll have a good time and kind of catch up." And I was kind of surprised because Marty never really been that way to me. I could tell he seemed really a lot more friendly to me, and it was really neat. And we had a good conversation. And not that we weren't friends. We just were never really
I get
close.
it.
Like Marty Smith and Tommy Croft were on their own, and me and Warren Reed were kind of on our own, and then of course Marty Tribes. So anyway, but then in 2000, in April of 2000, Lee Ramage called me up and he said, "Hey, I just got off the phone with Marty, and Marty was asking about you." And it was Good Friday. It was on Good Friday, on April of 2020. And Lee said, "You ought to call Marty, Steve." I said, "Really? You think I should?" He goes, "Yeah, you ought to call him." And I hung up the phone. I thought, he's probably busy, and you know how things come in our mind. I don't want to bug him, whatever. I said, "No, you know what? Lee told me to call him. I'm going to call Marty." And I called Marty up, and he answered, "Hey, Steve, how you doing?" Just all, happy. And he goes, "Man, I've been thinking about you. I've been thinking about you." And I didn't, know why he was thinking about me and so forth. But we started talking, and he started talking about Lee. And he goes, "Steve, Lee told me I needed to really receive Christ as my Savior. He goes, I'm a good guy, and I do good things, and I tell people about God from time to time." And I said, and I explained to Marty that Jesus Christ is our filter. He's our Savior. He's the one that took our place. That He died for our sins. And I said, He was our sacrifice. He was our example. And I said, "Marty, for me, I received Christ in August 29th, 1981. And I said, Marty, when I asked Jesus Christ to come into my life was changed, and I realized that I had to have His righteousness to go to heaven. Not that I'm a good person. I had to have His righteousness, and the only way I could get that is by believing on Him and calling upon Him and asking Him to come into my life, because He had taken my place, Marty. I can become His righteousness. He became what we were. He became our sin on the cross, so we could be His righteousness in heaven." And Marty said, "I've never seen it like that." And he said, "You know what? I'd like to do that." And this is after a 55-minute conversation, by the way. And Joe, at the end of that conversation on Good Friday, we prayed. And I'm not trying to take any glory, Joe, or nothing. I'm just telling you what happened. This is what happened. I don't get any glory for this. God gets all the glory. And Lee Lee Ramage and other people were a big part of anybody come to Christ. It's a bunch of people.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big part. But I just happened to be the one that time, and I led Marty into prayer and to receive Christ.
Awesome.
And Joe, the wildest thing happened. Marty he busted out, started laughing. He started laughing, and I started laughing. We laughed for 5 minutes. I mean, barely laughed.
What was so funny?
Laughed. And Marty said, Steve, and he would always say, Steve, that's the way he would always talk to me. Steve,
yeah.
Steve, why am I laughing? Why am I laughing? I said, Marty, the reason why you're laughing and I'm laughing is you're free from the guilt of sin.
Yeah.
All the heaviness of sin is gone. And he said, really? He goes, I do. I feel different. He goes, it was a joy I haven't known. And I talked to Lee later after that, and Lee told me, he goes, Marty laughed, but not really like that. Because I told him, he goes, he was a fun person to be around. Joe, that's what Jesus Christ does. He relieves us of the burdens of life and the burdens of sin that we're all under. And that's pretty much what happened to Marty. And then, of course, we know that Lee Ramage and his wife Tammy were in the dune buggy with Nancy and Marty that fateful day of the 27th of April, which was 16 days after Marty had prayed that prayer with me. Now, I'm not saying that prayer, if Marty hadn't prayed that prayer, he wouldn't have gone to heaven. I'm not the judge. I have no idea. All I know is I know for sure Marty Smith's in heaven right now.
Amen.
And Nancy too.
Yeah.
And so.
And I remember talking to you on that night too, Steve. And,
yeah,
you don't have to say anything, Steve. But yeah, we did talk that very night.
Yeah.
Anyway, is there anybody else you want to thank right now or mention? We're pretty much at the end of the show, Steve, and I just wanted to give you an opportunity. If there was somebody you wanted to thank or somebody you wanted to say hello to, take all the time you need and say what you want to say.
Well, of course, Warren Reed and I were great friends all through our career, and I'm still friends with Warren. We talk from time to time. And Marty Tribes, of course, we talk all the time. We talk probably once every other week. And there's been so many great friends I've met through racing. Tony Moses is one of my best friends. He was the regional director of Kawasaki, and we didn't get into that. I did motocross schools as well after I retired. Tony, funny thing, Honda wouldn't even give me a bike. Honda wouldn't give Rick Johnson a bike. Isn't that crazy? I mean, it's kind of strange. Well, Marty Smith in schools too, they didn't give him bikes.
Nope.
Kind of weird. But Kawasaki stepped up. Tony Moses got me a bike through the Team Green, and I rode motocross schools for 10 years on Kawasaki's, the KXs. So, but I've got so many great friends. My cousin Ricky Lynn, I failed to mention him. We talked about training. He was the one that would get me to go running. He'd come over, we'd go running and so forth. And there's so many people that I could just say thanks to. And I'm just so thankful to the motocross world, and that I was able to become one of the top riders, and to be in the Hall of Fame is a great honor. And so many people. Terry Mulligan hired me for Team Honda. Of course, my greatest thanks, of course, goes to my father, Gary Wise. I mean, if it wasn't for his love of motorcycles, you would never heard of Steve Wise. I've got another story about you never heard of Steve Wise. A really funny story, Joe, real quick. Few people know this, but when I was out at Team Honda at the end of '78, I moved to California. I had a Porsche 911 SC, and I was driving out there, and I had a friend riding with me. And this is a wild story I tell a lot. I don't know how much time we got, but this is funny. I'm going to California, driving out there, and when you drive to California back in the day, there wasn't hardly anybody on the road. And I'm going 140 miles an hour, going down on the road. And my friend eyed me onto going that fast, and I passed the policeman at 140. Anyway, lo and behold, I got stopped, but he didn't give me a radar. And anyway, I got off of that. They didn't give me a ticket, didn't search my car. When I got into my back of my car in New Mexico, my friend was freaking out. He had a pound of pot in his suitcase to his brother in California. And if it wasn't for the prayers of my grandmother, Joe, you'd never heard of Steve Wise. Because I would have been arrested right then. I'd probably gone to jail, anything. But there's so many things. There's so many stories we could talk about. But that was a funny one.
You know what it's called? Hey, Steve, you know what that's called? God's mercy.
God's grace and mercy. You're right, buddy. But I have so many people, Joe, and I couldn't remember all of them. But my dad so much, and had Jimmy Strait, my mechanic back then, he made that by Cliff White. I mean, there's so many people that through my years of racing that know I'm very involved now, going to races and sharing my faith. I go a lot to the Texas Vintage cross country events over the TVRC people. And you mentioned Albert Newman earlier. He's part of ARMA, and I go to those events and share. And I do speak at churches and other venues here and there. Of course, COVID has kind of slowed that down, but every Tuesday night, I have a show on Facebook.
Yeah.
It's called, and on YouTube. It's called Moto Fellowship Live, and I invite anybody who would like to come on 7:30 on Tuesday night. You can join into the Moto Fellowship group. My personal page is already maxed out, but the Moto Fellowship group, you can join that page, and you can come on Moto Fellowship. This Tuesday night, I'm going to have Lee Ramage. In fact, the man that was with Marty Smith when he passed. And I had Jimmy Weiner on, Marty Tribe's been on, Warren Reed's been on. Marty Smith was going to come on. He was going to be on my program. And we'd already talked about that. And I look forward to having a lot of other writers on. Having Donnie Hanson's been on there with me.
Yeah.
So I invite anybody who'd like to come onto the Moto Fellowship group page and come on with us. And so now, Joe, what I do is an elder man, is an older, I don't like to say older, let's say former pro. I'm just out here telling people they're loved by the Lord, and He loves us. And even through the crap we're going through with COVID and everything, and this is all, I'm telling you, folks, this is all part of it. I'm just telling you, it's all part of it. And we're possibly not heading into some good times. We're going to have to look into God and believe that God's in our life. And I tell everybody that Jesus Christ loves them, cares for him. He's with us, and He's just as far as our words away, Joe. He's closer to us than the words out of our mouth. And that's what I tell people. So that's what I'm doing now. And I love it. And just honoring God with my life the best I can.
Steve, thank you for taking the time to speak with me. I enjoyed it. We'll probably have to have another conversation in the future.
There's so many more stories, Joe. And thank you for what you do, Joe. And you're going to be on my show, too, probably here in the next couple of weeks, Lord willing. And we'll do that. But thank you for your service as well, Joe, remembering us old guys and all the things, the great things of racing. Because you know what? Motocross racing is the greatest sport in the world.
Amen.
To be a motocross rider, think about this real quickly. What you have to be doing. You've got to be doing 5 or 6 things at a time: the clutch, the throttle, the front brake, the rear brake, the shifting. You're moving your body all over the place. You're looking for lines, as well as racing against other riders. And the physical conditioning for a motocross racer is phenomenal.
Yes, it is.
Unbelievable. Motocross is the hardest, best sport in the world.
I agree.
And road racing is second.
Thank you again, Steve Wise. I'll speak to you soon.
Joe, thank you so much. Enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
My guest this morning has been Pastor Steve Wise. Some great stories about his years in motocross with Honda, Kawasaki, road racing, TT racing, and so much more. This show is, of course, brought to you by our sponsors, Northwest Mako CZ. For all your Mako and CZ parts, please contact Alan Brown. Preston Petty Products, the legend continues. Thank you, Paul and Patty Stainard, for all you do to keep our show going. AMSOIL, Russell Waters, I know you're listening. I want to thank you and AMSOIL, the first in synthetic oil since 1973. Tom McAllister, Full Circle Racing. I got an order from you yesterday. 2 boxes sitting right here in my shop. I'm ready to open them up for all your lacing and truing needs for vintage and modern. See Tom McAllister at Full Circle Racing. Curtis Leverton, thank you. Vintco, keep the ride going with over 650 products in their catalog. Also, keep your eyes open for a new part that's coming out from Vintco. I understand they will be reproducing Fox air shocks in the very near future. Vintco. And of course, Chris Carter, a dear friend, Motion Pro, for all your specialized tools, cables, and controls. Be sure to visit Motion Pro online and on social media. I want to thank everyone for joining me today here at Vintage Motocross Radio. Be sure to visit me or join me on Wednesday night for Vintage Motocross Q&A. This is Joe Abadi. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks again for joining me. Bye-bye.